Foundation workshops focusing on the use of GLML as a means to standardize data capture and transfer for capital markets transactions, with a view to reducing or avoiding fragmentation of data standards. Today's session will focus on the way in which GLML can be applied to a document. In this case, we're looking at a final terms for an MTN trade to capture key data points from the golden source of truth as part of the drafting process. Mike Hossack will be leading a demonstration of that. And as Mike goes through his demonstration, I'd like you as a group to focus on 4 key takeaways. The first one is the relative ease with which GLML can be applied by a user, by which I mean a lawyer or a market practitioner who has no coding or programming expertise, and that GLML can be applied freehand, literally by typing into the document, or actually incredibly easily using the GLML Word plugin, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the session. The second point is the importance of the need for an agreed and consistent taxonomy that underpins data capture and transfer. And that really is the sort of the core focus of the GLML Foundation as being the forum in which the market can together agree upon that taxonomy and curate it going forward. The third point really is that you'll see that once a document has had GLML applied to it, it becomes machine readable, meaning that those documents can then be used by any digital platform solution to facilitate document automation, workflow creation, data transfer between deal participants and downstream processes and systems. So using GLML does not tie a user to any particular fintech provider. You're free to work with whichever provider you wish to work with. And lastly, the fourth point is that the use of GLML, as you'll see, sort of avoids the creation or the need for any sort of additional links in, call it the data chain, in the form of any sort of intermediary protocols, and it reduces or indeed can eliminate the need for manual data entry and the various handoff points that we currently see in the current linear set of processes that we work with. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to hand you over to Mike Hossack, who will run you through a demo of applying GLML actually in the context of a final terms document. Over to you, Mike.
Great, thanks a lot, Phil. So I'm Mike Hossack. Some of you will know me already, but for those that don't, I'm a debt capital markets lawyer. I trained and qualified at Allen & Overy, and I spent the past 18 months at Novora helping to develop GLML. I'm actually going to be shortly returning to private practice with Allen & Overy. It was during my time at A&O that I first encountered GLML and learned how to use it, which just emphasizes the point that it is something that is designed to be easy for lawyers to use without any programming or coding experience or training. I certainly didn't have any. And what I'm going to do in this session is just take a practical look at how you actually apply GLML to a legal document. So the one way that I like to think about GLML is essentially a tool which allows us to take analog templates and turn them digital. And by analog templates, what I mean is just our traditional legal templates that we're all familiar with, such as this example. This is just a kind of plain vanilla MTN program, kind of pro forma final terms, but the same principles apply to any kind of legal template, regardless of kind of product or sector. So these kinds of traditional templates will include kind of blobs or spaces representing particular fields to be completed on a particular transaction. We have drafting notes, essentially saying whether or not certain sections or clauses need to be inserted depending on the details of a particular transaction, as well as suggested values as well. Essentially, it's just a guide to the lawyer as how to complete that document for any particular transaction. And GLML is doing exactly the same thing, just in a digital and machine readable format. So when we look at GLML, what we see are what we call tags or GLML tags. these kind of replace your blobs or your spaces. They represent particular data points in your document, so your series number, your tranche number, for example. And then we also have what we call logic statements or if statements. These essentially replace your drafting notes and say if one thing is true, or if one condition is met, insert the following text or section. So with GLML, what we are doing is really just replicating what's already there in our templates. And just through these two building blocks, so your tags and your kind of logic statements, you can mark up entire templates into GLML. And this is what I'm actually now going to kind of do live for us today, just with a very simple example. So what I've got here is a copy of the IGMA standard form of wholesale final terms. Again, we're focusing on final terms here, but the same principles could apply to any kind of template document. And just for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to pick a relatively simple section of this. It's random, so I'm just going to come down here to this section 7, where we have the issue date and the interest commencement date. And I'm just going to take us through how we can apply GLML to this section. Now, there's two ways, as Phil kind of alluded to it, there's two ways that we can input GLML into our document. The most basic way is literally just by typing in the relevant GLML into our document. And one important note to register is that here I'm just using Microsoft Word, so there's no special software required. So this allows lawyers, law firms to kind of manage their GLML documentation in exactly the same way as you would any other kind of document that you have in Word. And importantly, allows the lawyer to retain control and ownership of the document. But so I'll start off with the kind of the basic way of inputting GLML into this document. So first, I just need to identify where I need the GLML. And in this example that I picked, it's very obvious. So looking in this section 7, we know we need the issue date, and we have a blank space where we know that on a particular transaction, the issue date will be inserted. So we know that we need to replace this blank space with a GLML tag representing the issue date. So what I can literally do is type in the GLML tag using the GLML syntax, which is described in the user manual. It's fairly straightforward. It's just dollar signs and curly brackets. So then I've inputted a tag into my document just by typing it in. What I need to do to kind of complete this is we have a table at the bottom. So kind of built in here already. This table at the bottom is where we define the properties of that tag. So again, the properties of the tags are set out in the user manual, but essentially consist of a key. So this is kind of how the tag appears in the document. So here is issue_date. The label is the prompt or question that essentially asks a user in a workflow to input the relevant field. So, and this is kind of drafter's choice as to what you put. So I could leave that as just the issue date, or maybe you could phrase it as a question. It really doesn't matter as long as it's clear to the user. And then type. So GLML tags can have different types depending on the kind of information. So we have date type tags, percentages, money, numbers, text. Again, all explained in the user manual. Here for the issue date, that's a simple date type tag. And then there's this final column on the right, the value column. That's just in case we want to include any default value. So just by the process of completing those rows in the table at the bottom, and by typing this into my document, I have input a GLML tag into my document. If this was to be uploaded into a relevant kind of GLML reader software right now, it would read this document. It would identify there's one GLML tag in it, the issue date. It would ask the user to then complete the issue date, and then whatever date is input would then be rendered in this document in place of that tag. And at the end, I'll kind of show you how that actually works in practice. So that's the simple way of inputting a tag into a document. What I'm going to show you now is how we can do that using the GLML word plugin. So this is a plugin that sits within Microsoft Word. It's been developed by Navora, but with the intention of being made freely available to GLML Foundation members. And what I'm showing you today is kind of an early development version, so it's still under development. But what I'll show you today will kind of show you the premise of this plugin. So again, as I said, it sits within Microsoft Word. Let me just wait whilst it opens up. Here we go. And essentially, at its most basic level, what I can do is I have a list of tags built into this plugin, which in time will be linked to the GLML taxonomy, which I'm going to want to speak more about in a moment. But I can simply find the tag that I want to insert into my document. So here I'm looking for the issue date. Find that tag, and it's simply a case of clicking. And then my tag is inserted into the document with all the relevant syntax done for me, and also the table at the bottom is generated automatically. Which just makes the process of adding tags to a document as simple as clicking a button. What we can also do is create new tags. So let's just say, for example, that a particular data point we want to capture in GLML doesn't already exist. We can use this plugin to create a new tag. So here I can come down to this new data tag. We can select a type. So here, let's just say it'll be a date type tag. And now, for the sake of argument, I'm going to call it the settlement dates. I leave this text add to the document and create. And then my tag is created, it's added to the document. Again, the table at the bottom is done automatically. So again, it's simple to create new tags as well that we need to use. This kind of illustrates the flexibility of GLML. I think it's important to have that flexibility. Obviously, lawyers work on a wide variety of documents with some very complicated provisions and sections, and sometimes you need the flexibility to be able to reflect that in GLML. Now, the flip side of that flexibility is it kind of creates the possibility for fragmentation. Because, for instance, how would you stop, say, a lawyer at one firm and a lawyer at another firm marking up kind of separate final terms documents? One lawyer might use issue date as the tag here. Another lawyer might use settlement date. Now we know that they're referring to the same data point, but they've used different tags. So now the documents they've produced, although they mean the same thing, they're not going to be interoperable or compatible with each other. So this brings us on to the kind of rationale for the creation of what we call a GLML taxonomy. So I'm just going to bring that up on the screen. But this is essentially a dictionary of GLML tags to avoid that kind of problem, so that lawyers and GLML users know that for each particular data point, they know the relevant tag that they need to use to represent that, just to ensure that the entire market is kind of singing from the same hymn sheet, if you like. So at the moment, this taxonomy is just focused on kind of basic terms required in MTN documentation, with the view to expanding that to more kind of complicated revisions and eventually outside of MTNs into structured products and into kind of loan agreements as well. But using this as a guide, it's to ensure that whilst GLML is flexible, we actually, as a market, ensure that we are using a kind of universal, comparable standard, and that the different firms aren't doing different things that then don't link up with each other. So I'll just go back to my final terms markup. And now, so that's kind of GLML tags. So that's kind of the first kind of building block of GLML. And the second kind of building block is those if statements or logic statements. Now, again, they can be input in the document in the same way, in terms of literally just typing them in using the syntax, which is explained in the user manual. But here, it's far easier to use the GLML plugin to insert these statements. So now I'm going to look at the interest commencement date, which is a good example of kind of where we need to use these logic statements. We can see in our template that we have 3 different options that may need to be included. on any particular transaction, we can specify an actual date. We can just have the words issue date. We can also say not applicable. And then we've got a drafting note explaining that to us. So just to show you one example of how this works, I'll take away the square brackets. We don't need those anymore. But as a lawyer looking at this, I know that not applicable is going to be relevant where there's an issuance of zero coupon notes. So essentially, I know this wording. I need that wording to be included in the document for a zero coupon issuance. So that wording needs to be the subject of an if statement, which is tied to the interest basis. So I just need to highlight the wording or the section or the clause that needs to be made conditional. And again, I can use the plugin to create the if statement. So what I need to do is select the kind of tag that will form the basis of the condition. So here I know it's going to be the interest basis tag, because that's the tag that already exists. I know if the interest basis equals zero coupon, then I want that not applicable to be inserted. So I've highlighted that wording. I've completed the field here. So when I insert that into my document, I've now got the GLML syntax all done correctly in the document. And what this means is essentially the kind of GLML reader software will read this. It will come to this section and it will say if the interest basis is zero coupon, then it will insert whatever's between these two brackets. So here it's not applicable. One important point to mention is obviously here it's just a very simple example. We've got the words not applicable, but inside that you could put further GLML tags. You could put further if statements. So you can really use as much logic as you need to get the right result in your document. But now if I wanted to finish this off, what I would need to do is insert another logic statement. Say if the interest basis is not zero coupon, then it'll either be specifying a date or specifying the issue date. And then within that, we'd have further if statements, depending on where we want to specify the date or whether we're just going to refer to the issue date. And just through that process, so that process of identifying data points and inserting GLML tags to represent them, and inserting logic statements where there's conditionality in our templates. Just for that process, we can mark up the entire document into GLML. So what I've got here is that a finished version of this ICMA standard form final terms marked up into GLML. So I'm just going to bring this up. You can see there's lots more GLML logic in here, lots more tags. One thing you'll notice is there's no highlighting here. So the highlighting is just for reference to make it really visually obvious where the GLML tags are, but you don't actually need them. So here the highlighting has been removed. And we can see we've got a full document, again, just in Microsoft Word with all our GLML tags in it. I'll just show you the table at the bottom. This is where all the tag properties are set out. And again, it's completely editable in Word. And once we have a document fully marked up like this, there's then a little bit of a technical process where this kind of Word document has to be converted into what we call a JSON file, which is basically just a type of file that can be read by an appropriate GLML reader software. And again, that can be generated just using this plugin. And then with that GLML document and your associated JSON file, you as the document owner can then take that to, as Phil mentioned, any kind of technology provider who has built a GLML reader. You can take your document to that and you can use their software. So with GLML, you're not tied to any particular technology firm or software provider, and it's really your choice. But because the vision is the entire market is using the same language, lawyers, document owners will be able to use kind of competing but interoperable systems to kind of manage the kind of the workflows once the GLML templates have been created. So I'm just going to end by taking a look at what we mean by when I refer to kind of a workflow, and have a look at the possibilities that come from having documents marked up into GLML. So as I said, this could be, because GLML is open source, any technology provider can can build platforms to do this. What I'm going to show you is just a very basic demonstration kind of workflow platform built by Navora. So it's not particularly fancy, but it's just built to show the kind of the premise of GLML and how the workflow works. So I've just brought that up on the right-hand side of my screen. And what we've essentially done is taken this GLML template, we've created the JSON file, we've uploaded those to this platform. And now this platform has created a workflow based on that GLML template. So just to see how this works, very simply, we can see that on the left of our screen in the GLML template, the very first tag that we encounter is this, the very first GLML that we encounter is this logic statement, which is referring to the prip subscription. And it's saying if prip subscription required equals yes, insert the following legend. Again, that the computer, kind of the software has read that, and it's made that the first question in the workflow for us to complete. So this prip subscription required is a yes/no type tag. So we're asked to select yes or no. If we select yes, the condition in our if statement is met. And then when we look in the document preview, we will see that that legend now appears. If we go back and change that to no, the condition in our if statement in our underlying GLML document has not been met. So when we go to our document preview, the paragraph doesn't appear. That's essentially how this works. What we're seeing here, so when we referred to the label of the tag earlier, it's literally the prompt that we're seeing here. So I personally don't really like this. Prip subscription required question mark is not particularly clear. But if I wanted to change that, all I would have to do is go into my GLML template, go to the table at the bottom, find where that tag is, and change the wording in the table at the bottom. When that's re-uploaded to the platform, that new wording will appear. So that's how easy it is to kind of edit GLML documents. Because it's all in Word, there's no programming software. It's literally just editing a Word document, re-uploading it. So I'll just go through and do a couple more so we can see the next tag or the next GLML we encounter is written to the MIFID. The MIFID legend, so this is a little bit out of date now. This was done, I think it was just over a year ago. But we can see, so the if statement is linked to the MIFID target market being professional and ECPs only. And there's actually further tags and further if statements within this section. And this will show up in this essentially creates a dynamic workflow. So here, if we select professional ECPs only, the workflow will then prompt us to insert these additional questions. Whereas if we select not applicable, obviously they're not there. Again, in this workflow, we can see the different types of tags and how they're represented. So where we have a date type tag, such as the signing date, so we're prompted to select a date. So here for the issuer, again, this is just a kind of made up issuer, but here that cell is a default. So that if you remember that column in the bottom of the table on the right is where we set defaults. This is how it appears. It essentially means that a value will just be defaulted in the workflow. Again, we have currency type tags. We have more yes, no types. Here's our interest basis tag where we could select zero coupon, for example. We have kind of text type tags, more dates. So everything that we're seeing in this workflow is being directly generated from what's in the GLML template. And then not only is this, our kind of responses in this workflow, they're generating our document, but it's also capturing all of those transaction data points as structured data, which means that each point only needs to be input once. It can then flow into multiple documents. It can flow seamlessly to any other transaction party that needs that same data point. So in the context of MTNs, that could be clearing systems, listing venues, for example. All of that and all of those efficiencies that come from that digital transfer of structured data is underpinned by the GLML in the documentation, which I think brings me to my kind of concluding remarks, is essentially the importance of having lawyers and market practitioners involved in the production, or at least the review of GLML documents, and the importance of the market coming together to agree the standard, so that to avoid this fragmentation, and ensure that competition in the market is based on the quality of the technology platforms and not the standards, not the data standards being used. So I'm just going to pause there. Happy to take any questions, but if not, I'll hand back to Phil to conclude.
Many thanks, Mike. There's an awful lot of information in that relatively short session that Mike's just taken us through. We are mindful of that. So we are going to post that this session on the GLML Foundation website, which is now live and can be found at www.glml.org. So we'll post today's session, and people can review again at their leisure and ask any questions subsequently if they have any. I should also just reiterate that the core taxonomy that Mike's looked at briefly there is also on the website, as is the user manual. You'll have gleaned from Mike's session that one of the other items that is in development and will be available later on to participants in the foundation is the word plugin. You'll have seen there from the demonstration between sort of applying GLML freehand and then applying it using the plugin. The plugin makes life quite a lot easier, and so the expectation is that plugin will also be available at some point in the first half of next year via the foundation website, and it is being trialed at the moment with certain users with a view to it becoming available for general release next year, as mentioned. Are there any specific questions or queries that people want to raise on this session now? If you don't want to do it sort of in this open forum, feel free to contact me or Vic or Mike separately, and probably the best way to do that is either by email, or you can get hold of us through the GLML website. But if there's anything anyone wants to raise now, please feel free to do so before I start talking about the focus of the next session and the timing for that.
It's been helpful to hear from Mike in terms of his perception of how much time it takes then to complete a set of final terms in the GLML concept versus a traditional formatting for a law firm document.
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, there's a few variables. Obviously, it depends on how kind of familiar if the lawyer is using GLML. Obviously, the first time you're using it, it naturally takes a little bit longer. It also depends on whether you have a bit like a normal document, whether you have a good precedent to start from. So, for example, if you were marking up a new program into GLML, if you already had a program that's similar marked up in the GLML, rather than starting from scratch with a new program, you could just take your old program and just kind of just start from there to make it simpler. But I suppose as a rule of thumb, I'd say the preparation, marking up a pro forma final terms into GLML is probably the equivalent amount of work. If you're talking about a program establishment, so you're preparing the basis prospectus, the program agreement, agency agreement, it's almost akin to having another document to prepare. It will take a similar amount of time. But then once that's done for a particular program, you don't need to then look at it again unless maybe there's some feedback or some changes on the annual updates going forward. So once that work's done, it's done, and then you can then start reaping the benefits from it on any particular drawdowns under that program. And in terms of the drawdowns under the program and preparing the final terms, it's much quicker. It's much quicker to prepare the final terms using one of these kind of workflow platforms than it would be to kind of filling out the blobs manually in Word. That's where you get quite significant time saving.
Thanks, Mike. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to raise? Okay, thanks. So the focus of the next workshop, which we're looking to hold sometime during the week of the 20th of September now, given we've got the holiday season upon us proper. The focus of that session will be how the operations teams and market infrastructure providers need data points defined for their downstream processes and systems. And so we'll be looking in quite a lot of detail at the taxonomy, and the sort of the ideal outcome from that session would be the formation of a core working group to actually sit down and take forward the development and the curation of the core taxonomy as part of the foundation's work. So, but we'll be in touch on that session separately with a save the date in the coming days. So as I mentioned, there's a lot in this session today. It's quite technical. We will be posting it on the website. Please do take a look at the website at your leisure. And as I said, you'll find the taxonomy and the user manual available via that. And if you want to get in touch with any of us independently of this session, please feel free to do so, and we can address any questions that you may have. So I know we scheduled for an hour, but in keeping with all prior sessions, we've done it in a short and sweet basis. So unless there's anything else from anybody on the line, I propose to end the session, and we will reconvene in September.